30 years ago, an up-and-coming young hip-hop group released the follow-up to their successful debut album from the previous year. What at the time was a curious, interesting, jazz-inflected, lyrically progressive alternative to gangsta rap, ended up being undisputedly one of the 10 greatest, most important, most decade-defining albums of the 1990s. In the 30 years since its release, its influence and stature has grown exponentially, not just within hip-hop, but beyond. You have socially conscious, alternative/progressive hip-hop greats such as Nas, Talib Kweli, Mos Def, Common, The Fugees and Lauryn Hill, pre-egomaniacal Kanye West, and Kendrick Lamar. You have neo-soul to contemporary R&B soul and pop greats such as Erykah Badu, Maxwell, D'Angelo, Mary J. Blige, Pharrell Williams, Raphael Sadiq. All of them owe a massive debt to the enduring artistry and timeless greatness of this group and the masterpiece they unveiled to an unsuspecting public back in 1991. Not Public Enemy, not N.W.A, not Dr. Dre, not Biggie, not Tupac, not Jay-Z, not Eminem, not Kanye. This group gave the world the gift of the greatest hip-hop album ever made. Which group is it? Which album is it? Welcome to the 25th edition of the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and find out.
Welcome to the 25th edition of the Curmudgeon Rock Report. This is Christopher O'Connor coming to you from suburban Houston. And with me, as always, is Arturo Andrade coming to you from Gwangju, South Korea. And we host the podcast made just for you. We don't do hot takes, we do honest takes. So then this belongs to you. Who are you? You are the rock geek iconoclastic outsider looking for a safe haven in a world where rock and roll no longer predominates. Well, it sure as heck does here on the Curmudgeon Rock Report, where we not only celebrate the music, we live its majesty in full color and at full force. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some stuff you never knew before. And now you can be a part of our brand new private Facebook group, which we are calling the Curmudgeon Rock Report's Curmudgeonly Community. Yep, that is a mouthful, but it's pretty awesome. You can join us there and share thoughts, musings, and random excitement with your fellow travelers along the curmudgeonly path to rock and roll goodness. Arturo, what's the dealio?
Well, I like your hint you just gave there as to what we're going to talk about in today's episode. But yeah, everything's well here. It's end of the year. It's Christmas time. We just got our first snow here in Gwangju. There are two G's in Gwangju. And yeah, of course, this time of the year, when it's the end of the year and the snow comes, it always gets me reflective. And we are doing nothing but reflecting today on 30 years ago, the release of the greatest hip-hop album ever made.
But first, we need to put on our futuristic shades, and we are now bursting and thrusting into the parallel universe. We swear this is not porn, but we are thrusting into our parallel universe. Arturo, where are we going on the other side of the space-time continuum this week?
We are going to a parallel universe where solo female indie rockers rule. And if there were a better world, these two that we're going to talk about would be absolute superstars, especially the second one, who really is one of the best songwriters in the world. But anyway, yes, solo female indie rockers. And I will start with a very young woman from the Netherlands. Her name is Pip Blom, and her latest record, Welcome Break, which came out a month or 2 months ago. Yeah, I think it was 2 months ago.
Yeah, it was about then.
Yeah, it's about then. And anyway, hailing from the Netherlands, she's made some small but strong waves in Europe and the UK, more especially with her brand of irresistibly catchy guitar pop that kind of harkens back to 1990s indie rock stalwarts such as Liz Phair, Throwing Muses, Juliana Hatfield, and even more recent indie rock stars such as Courtney Barnett. More on her later.
Hmm.
First, we have to explain the name Pip Blom. Okay. Yes, it is the young woman's name, but it's also the name of her band. You can think of it kind of like Alice Cooper, where you have Alice Cooper, the guy, and then you have the Alice Cooper group, or at least as they were known back in the early days. And yes, this is the only podcast, folks, where Pip Blom and Alice Cooper will ever be mentioned in the same sentence.
Word.
Starting in 2016, Blom released a series of terrific standalone singles. You can find them all on YouTube after looking the titles up on discogs.com. That led to the 2019 release of her excellent debut album, Boat. Now, Boat had a quirky, angular, offbeat vibe combined with a nearly lo fi production sound that lent it an urgency and an edge befitting her 90s alt rock influences without outright copying them. That's important. It was easily one of the top 10 rock albums of that year. Everyone listening, you should check it out. Now, with more attention on her and legitimate anticipation for her new album, she has tons of views on YouTube, and Mojo Magazine recently did a feature on her. How does Blom confront the expectations? Simple. She goes big, bold, and bombastic.
Hmm.
Um, Big sounding guitars prevail along with choruses that aspire to arena rock proportions and gargantuan hooks that sink in and just don't let go. Let's face it, rock music is nowadays a niche genre with very few artists and bands under the age of 40 who could play to more than 5,000 people.
Yeah, pretty
And
much.
and she's one of these who's never going to be an arena rocker. But there is something endearing about Blom not giving a shit
Hmm.
and shooting for the stadium rock stars anyway. It's as if she knows she was born 30 years too late for this music to have any kind of serious commercial impact. So fuck it, just let loose, rock out, and if she picks up a few new fans like me along the way, then she's all the better for it. It's also clear, at least from the lyrics, that she's had some romantic relationship issues in the past couple of years since her debut. The song I Know I'm Not Easy to Like rocks mercilessly and defiantly, even with a lyrical admission of blame that lacks any kind of self pitying that an inferior artist would inject the song with. You have the mid tempo swing of Different Tune, probably the prettiest song on the album with the prettiest melody. It's really brutally honest in its admission of simply not wanting to change and willing to kill a relationship. Faces, the song Faces, is the companion piece of the latter song. Yes, again, with a walloping arena rock chorus, where Blom takes the opposite tack and offers to go back to the start. You Don't Want This, the album's opening track and opening single, sets the tone for the album as a scorching indie rock anthem about being sick of love and sick of yourself for falling in love.
Hmm.
Are you listening, Matthew Sweet?
Yes.
Yeah. While not as consistent as her debut album, the highs of Welcome Break are among the best songs Blom has ever written. Definitely in my top 20 albums of the year list.
Yeah, I need to spend more time with this record, honestly. But yeah, I think what you just said is pretty right on. That there's a she's playing for her imaginary friends, which
Yeah,
I guess are us.
yeah,
And so it's like, and what I mean by that is there's a stadium. When I say us, it's the two of us and all of you listening. That picture us, kind of filling Madison Square Garden, and she's singing to us as if she's like trying to amplify there.
yeah,
But there is a craftsmanship to her stuff that is really striking. There's an anger, but also she's got the hooks. I mean, she's
yeah,
got the talent, and like you said, she's there's a fearlessness there and a bluntness and an honesty, which some of which I think might actually be influenced by who I'm going to talk about shortly,
Yeah.
but in a less filtered, less sophisticated, more angry, more visceral way. I think that might be fair to say.
Yeah.
And I think that it's kind of funny you mentioned Alice Cooper. That who knows? Maybe back in the '70s, she would have been more akin to what those guys in Detroit were doing. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Who knows? So no, I'm with you there. But like I said, I got to spend more time with this record. But on first listen, I dig it, and I can see why you dig it because it's got your tastes
Yeah.
written all over it.
Yeah.
And I will say this: one of the things that I'm liking about this lost rock star generation,
Yeah.
as we have dubbed them in the past,
Yeah.
is they like to make short records. Uh,
Yes.
they are not about 70-minute sprawling opuses for the most part.
For
I
the
mean,
most part, right?
yeah, you get your
Yeah.
King Gizzards sometime that'll run a little long in the tooth, but for the most part, you get these folks. They're making 34-minute, 37-minute, 42-minute records,
Yeah.
and it harkens back to sort of the vinyl era when you only had a limited amount of space, and so they're kind of reinventing that and showing that even in the internet age, it could still be, you know,
Well, I
and
mean,
yeah,
it kind of makes sense though, because like younger generation of music fans. I mean, I don't want to poo-poo too much, but
yeah,
there's a bit of ADD in a lot of younger generation music fans. So there's a sense of don't bore us, get to the chorus.
yeah. Well,
Um,
hey, I like that. But at the same time, you have to differentiate between these folks on
yeah,
the one extreme and the Doja Cats and the Little Nas X's on the other.
yeah,
Both of whom I like, by the way. But remember, they got big vis-a-vis because they learned how to game SoundCloud and TikTok,
right,
which basically means you have about 25 seconds to make or break yourself. So
exactly, yeah,
that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about album art, which is
yeah. That's true. That's true.
get in, be tight, do 9 or 10 songs, be good, get out.
Yeah.
So I think that there's that spirit here, which I guess is a good segue to
Yes.
who I'm talking about, and we've hinted at it about 9 times in 3 minutes. This is the new album by Courtney Barnett. Uh, if you Speaking of that lost star rock star generation episode that we did a few months back, Ms. Barnett, the Australian genius, she was number 2 on that list, right behind your buddy there, rock and roll Jesus,
Ty
Ty
Siegel. Yeah.
Ty
Yeah.
Siegel. So Courtney Barnett is back. She has just released in the last couple of weeks her third solo record. This is excluding the record that she did with Kurt Vile, 2017's Lot of Sea Lice. But this is her third solo record, which she has called Things Take Time, Take Time. And it's a pretty spot on title for this record in a lot of ways. She's, let's say, when she first came to our attention in 2015, she's a 28-year-old wise ass slacker poet. Definitely an acolyte in her mind to Kurt Cobain and other gnarly rockers. And she does this brilliant record called Sometimes I Sit and Think, and Sometimes I Just Sit, which, while it's jokey on multiple listens, grows poignant and actually pretty profound. And she's got that guitar crunch. Well, here, then in 2017, she releases an album called Tell Me How You Really Feel, where you get a sense she's starting to mature a little bit. That, she's also a craftsman and she's starting to kind of lean more on the craft, get more subtle, get a little calmer, yet, just as poignant and just as sort of romantic as she's apt to be. Well, now she's got this record that she's done, and she's morphed from that 28-year-old slacker into a 34-year-old with 7 more years of perspective and experience under her belt. And it sure sounds like it. With this record, which is 10 songs, about 34 minutes. There's a real gentleness, albeit a gnarly gentleness, to this record that perhaps befits the COVID isolation and desolation and loneliness that provided the context for it, and which ultimately emerge as the album's main themes. She did this and she took about a year to do it, but it was done under COVID lockdown. It's kind of self-produced down there, and she, in a lot of ways, she might as well be singing these songs. I get this picture of her sitting on her back porch in a classic barking at the moon posture, like
Yeah, yeah,
kind of like huddled down,
yeah,
where she's lamenting, but she's also remaining hopeful all throughout the record. And so when it opens, the album opener it's called Ray Street, and it has this really laid back vibe that makes me think that Kurt Weill had a really strong influence on her when
yeah,
they made
yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
Sea Lice, because it would
Sure.
not be out of place on his masterpiece Bottle It In
Yeah.
from 2018.
Right.
And so in a lot of ways, this song suggests, and you get some of this throughout the record too, that you get the sense that she's slowing down and stretching out as she ages, which sounds like a really good descriptor for the growing up process that I have endured over the
Yeah.
past 25 years. Although, you know me, it's been really slow and really stretched out. The fact that I got married when I was 45, I mean, there you go. But enough about me. With this record, I said, the guitar is still there, but it's just subtler. It's more echoey. Generally, it's more in service of the melody and strong structure. It ain't just riffs now. I will say this, like I said, so it starts off sort of gentle and, sort of wearing the romance on its sleeve. But as it goes along, it starts to get into that more sort of Courtney Barnett vibe and that pocket that only she can get into
Yeah.
in terms of sound and lyric, and that sort of clever but still poignant emotion. I mean, the highlights are all in a row for me, starting with the fifth track, Turning Green, where it's got this simple little bass line and swinging beat. And obviously, there's hopeless romanticism in the lyrics. It's very kind of, I miss you and I wish you were here, and just really kind of sweet. But then it really has this exquisitely ringing siren of a guitar solo for a coda. I mean, this girl can play.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah. She's a
yeah,
kick-ass guitar player. Yeah.
yeah, she's fantastic, and so that kind of sneaks in there. It's like the first time in the record that it really, you think it's going to be a straight, sort of almost adult contemporary type of vibe, and then all of a sudden that returns. The next song on it is called "Take It Day by Day," which is a rocking little ditty about the all too relevant COVID era subject of checking in on a friend to make sure that that friend won't kill themselves.
Yeah.
you know, all too relevant. I mean, I've got friends that have been there. I haven't been there. Came close, but I haven't been there. Um, and then from there, you get what I think is the best song on the record, which is "If I Don't Hear From You Tonight," which is just this wonderful power pop love song, equal parts doughy-eyedness and desperation, with some really cute but again kind of profound lyrics. She's got one that says, "If loving you is a crime, then give me those front page headlines." You know, it's
Yeah.
almost kind of like Ray Davies kind of winky winky
Right.
kind of stuff, but it's good. And then the last little highlight I'll mention is the song "Splendor," which is this little it's a 2-minute bluesy rocker, but it's about grieving a lost relationship. Very simple lyric, but it really makes its point. Uh, she can be a wise ass, but she feels, and I think that she feels more on this record than she ever has. And it comes across and very strong. So I would say, even though it's less wordy maybe and less jokey, she still has a lot to say. I think there's just an economy to it now
Yeah.
that propels her more into the modern pantheon of rock and roll greatness. This is a record I'll be revisiting quite a bit, I think. So, what do you think?
No, I love it. I mean, I'm like I'm a huge Courtney fan. Um, Listen, I'll say this. I know it's time to make an exaggerated statement by me, but
Yes.
I think she's Australia's greatest living songwriter. And yes,
Yeah.
I know Nick Cave is still alive.
Yeah. No,
Okay,
she has exceeded she
she-
has exceeded Nick Cave. I think
yeah,
she's one of the best lyricists on the planet.
yeah, I
You
agree
know.
too. And
Yeah.
on this album, lyrically, the other big theme I see on this record is stasis.
Yeah.
Being stuck and not being able to go anywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if she was together. She was in a relationship with someone for a while. I wonder if that relationship is over because she drops hints on it of like
Yeah.
missing the other person, wishing you were here, and not having
Yeah.
you anymore, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, basically, Splendor is the lament of the fresh breakup.
Yeah, that's what it
And
seems like.
yeah, goodbye. I wish you were here, but I know you're gone, and it's kind of like coming to terms with that. But like you said, stasis, as in we were on lockdown during COVID, and
Yeah.
I mean, look, who hasn't experienced some kind of stasis especially in America? And that is a segue. We're leaving the parallel universe. And now, folks, let us describe to you and let us launch into our deep, deep, deep discussion and reverence for the greatest hip hop album ever made. Arturo, open the door and tell us what we are talking about.
Yeah, for those of you who did not get the hint that I dropped in the teaser to this episode and some of the small little things Chris has blurted out, the album we're talking about, it came out 30 years ago. This year is the 30th anniversary of that album that we think is the greatest hip hop album ever made. A Tribe Called Quest released its second album, The Low End Theory, on September 24th, 1991. Now, if you're good with dates, you would know Nirvana's Nevermind was also released that day. 30 years later, it's pretty inarguable that both albums proved revolutionary. Yes, folks, we are claiming A Tribe Called Quest, The Low End Theory, is the greatest hip hop album ever made. Now, naturally, it's been a fertile season for reverence for personal recollections of and analysis as to why the low end theory still matters. These best are the best of these are is from writer Lex Power, who published an article in the Ringer, Bill Simmons' website, about the greatness of the low end theory and all that. However, all of these think pieces and the hot takes and the attempts at deep dive have stopped short of a certain superlative. So that's where we fill the gap. A Tribe Called Quest, The Low End Theory, according to these curmudgeons, is the greatest hip hop album ever made, period. And that's certainly different from calling it the most important, although the album certainly belongs in that conversation. No, we are taking the additional step here. And what we're saying is that no hip hop album is greater. Why? Well, that's what the rest of this episode will be about. Maybe it's not something we can adequately capture in the span of 70 minutes or so, but we will drill down in ways that you may expect. Now, here's an initial volley. The album's most famous stanza is its first, the opening lyrics to the first track, Excursions, where Q-Tip kicks it off. Back in the days when I was a teenager, before I had status, before I had a pager, this is 1991, you could find the abstract listening to hip hop. My pops used to say it reminded him of bebop. I said, well, daddy, don't you know that things go in cycles, the way that Bobby Brown is just amping like Michael. It's all expected. Things are for the looking. If you got the money, Quest is for the booking. Now, there's a whole lot going on in those three little couplets. And there's also some misdirection at play. The bebop reference is a wise one, and so is Q-Tip's invocation of the cyclical nature of popular tastes, if you will. But there's a neat trick there as well. Tip equates his group with Bobby Brown, not Michael Jackson. They're just doing their thing just as all their contemporaries are doing theirs. And all the while, though, you just cannot escape the big, fat, ridiculous bass sample driving the song. A Tribe Called Quest demonstrates that the hip hop idiom is remarkably permeable and Q-Tip and Ali Shaheed Muhammad, basically the DJ of the group, proceed to fill in the spaces better than anyone ever has then or since. It all comes down to the bass, the beat, the courage to experiment, and the idiosyncrasies of Q-Tip and Fife Dog as rappers. We'll expand on that, on all of that from here. How did the Low End Theory come to be? What makes it the greatest in our estimation? Why this album and not other commonly cited contenders? Why is calling this thing jazz rap actually kind of insulting? And what exactly makes this album so damn exciting and timeless? Folks, let your dearly beloved Curmudgeons lead the way and leave no doubt that the Low End Theory is definitively the greatest hip hop album ever made.
The Curmudgeons would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge all of the great musicians and artists who left the earth during 2021. Here is a roll call recited with fondness. Bunny Wailer, Michael Nesmith, Shock G, Phil Spector, Charlie Watts, DMX, Mary Wilson, Biz Markie, Don Everly, Jim Steinman, Lee Scratch Perry, and Jimmy Rogers. We try to honor such legends as these every time we hit the record button on the Curmudgeon Rock Report. May we never fail them.
All right, so let us set the stage. And we should really start setting the stage with what kind of inspired us, or one of the main inspirations for us to do this episode in the first place. This year also marks the 10th anniversary of the documentary that came out 10 years ago, directed by actor, comedian, and podcast host, happens to be Michael Rappaport. The name of the movie is Beats, Rhymes, and Life, The Travels of a Tribe Called Quest. And it really goes into the history of the group from the beginning, during their peak years, the turbulent relationships that group had within amongst each other, their breakup, their reunion tours and shows, the breakup again because Fife Dog and Q-Tip just really were really not getting along with each other in the late noughties. So it's a documentary that I highly recommend anyone who's into music documentaries, especially hip hop documentaries, for a group that's this important. It really is like these audacious kids from Queensbridge and how they embraced hip hop and found their way to the opportunity to make these great albums. The Low End Theory being the masterpiece of, or one of them, or the greatest masterpiece of the masterpieces they made. Some of the things that I got from the documentary that I think is important to note. Okay, yes, you had the Jungle Brothers in the 1980s, but A Tribe Called Quest really were the birth of socially conscious hip hop and black conscious hip hop on a mainstream level. No one had brought it to the mainstream like they did.
Yeah, not like they did. And I mean, and that's a good jump off point because I mean, Jonathan Davis, now known as Kamal Ibn John Farid, otherwise known as Q-Tip, is one of the great geniuses of hip hop. His story is, he's born 1970, which makes him a little bit younger than a lot of the other pioneers, and
Yeah.
arguably one of the leaders, if not the leader of rock's or of rap's second generation. So yeah, he grows up out there in Queens in the Queensbridge projects. However, is fortunate enough to attend high school at an arts focused high school in Manhattan. That's where he meets Ali Shaheed Muhammad and a couple of guys from the Jungle Brothers, and that's sort of the beginning of what was known as the Native Tongues Collective. De La Soul and Queen Latifah were offshoots of that eventually, and the whole idea was all of these contemporaries that were teenagers when they started, and they had this ambition, they had these ideas, and they dug in the crates harder than anybody ever had. They had a natural sense of rhythm in terms of their understanding of the beats, and the musicality of hip hop. Very, very idiosyncratic. Q-Tip in that movie, he says he disavows this idea that he's the driving force or that he's the resident genius. He at one point says basically something like, "I ain't no fucking Ginzu knife," and that's not. But dude, he was, and so it sort of comes from him, and Ali Muhammad was more of a DJ, but was sort of a just as ambitious uh, in terms of experimentation, of making things fun, of finding the music and finding their own voice. And so originally, it's four guys. It's Q-Tip, it's Ali Shaheed Muhammad, it's Jerobi White, who is a real nut. He's not much of a rapper. He's kind of a dancer. He's kind of like Nastastovich from from Pavement. He's just kind of like
Yeah.
he's kind of like
Bob Nastanovich, you mean?
Nastanovich, yes.
Yeah.
So he's kind of like the spiritual guy, kind of the spiritual leader of the group. And then there's Fife Dog, who's a fascinating character in hip hop. He's also a Queens kid, but he is a 5 foot tall diabetic, uh, and so
Yeah.
he's this little guy, but he's definitely more earthbound than Q-Tip. Q-Tip was like this. It was like the Jimi Hendrix of hip hop. There was something there in terms of the way he thought and the way that the lyrics rolled off his tongue, that was just wholly unique, idiosyncratic as hell, uh, and but also had some things to say. He did a lot of free association, and so like I said, they meet here in school. They released their first record, "People's Instinctive Travels," in 1989.
Great fucking album.
Yeah, it's a very strong record. I've always loved "Can I Kick It," which is
Yeah.
it's deceptive because when it comes on one of my mixes on Spotify, I immediately think it's "Walk on a Wild Side,"
Yeah.
because that's kind of how they start it, and then it turns into this kind of like woozy psychedelic, kind of like ridiculous, funny,
Yeah.
sort of uh, uh, like kind of sexual innuendo song. So that's how they get their start. They do this record, but it's a little bit hazy, a little bit lazy, and it's obviously the work of 18 and bright 18 and 19-year-old kids, but it sounds like they're sort of unpolished diamonds and their first time in the studio.
And speaking of that album, another thing the documentary points out, in connection also to them like being the birth of that socially conscious, black conscious, Afro American conscious hip hop, but they also were the first hip hop group to bring like a multi genre sophistication to hip hop
Sure.
that they hadn't seen before. Obviously, the jazz stuff, but they were quite open in the funk as well. I mean, the funk has always been a part of hip hop's DNA,
Yeah,
but a Tribe Called Quest celebrated those influences.
yeah, but they're interesting because it's not only jazz, but it's jazz fusion.
Yeah,
It's bebop. It's kind of that um like muso funk, not like yeah. Do they use a little bit of James Brown and funkadelic in their sampling vocabulary? Yes, but a lot of it is that sort of muso, off the beaten path, the kind of under the radar, uh,
yeah,
funk, almost experimental, like
right,
this kind of stuff. It's like black, like noodling
yeah,
is a lot of their source material, and kind of lends itself, not necessarily a psychedelic vibe, but just sort of like weird, exciting jukebox feel.
sure, sure,
And they also, and we'll get into this obviously when we talk about the low end, their approach to sampling was absolutely revolutionary and kind of lays the groundwork for everything that's come since
yeah,
in terms of how um, a little bit different. We'll get into this, but a lot of people say, "Well, wasn't that the Bomb Squad?" Well, yeah, sure, but the Bomb Squad was doing it in the guise of the guys of punk rock,
yeah,
whereas these guys were just doing it as sort of musical innovators and producers.
yeah,
Their ambition was to produce good music given the technology they had at the time. One thing to point out, and this also sets the stage for the low end theory too. They had probably the most tumultuous relationship with the music business,
Yeah.
or at least on record. Of any,
Right.
they were never happy with Jive Records. Uh, their original management, well, they shared it with the Jungle Brothers. There was a big falling out there, lawsuits and lots of back and forth. And movie gets into this too. And not only that, but the royalties they were getting from Jive, they were getting cheated. That's one of the reasons that they broke up, is they weren't making enough money. And
Right.
not only that, but uh, one of the big sources of tension between Fife and Q-Tip, not only Fife's resentment over not being featured enough,
Yeah.
but also the money.
Sure.
That
Sure. That's
Fife
always
didn't.
that's always at the heart of groups breaking up or having strife. It's usually the
Yeah,
money.
but it goes further with these guys, that their initial experiences and their desire to make it in the business and their frustrations really kind of define. There's a lyrical theme that goes through the low end theory, so it's not just the connecting the past, present, and future of black music and black culture, which is a big obviously a thread that runs through it, but it's also this dissatisfaction with concert promoters, record label people, the middlemen, the managers, and the people that control the money. That's like about a third of the record,
Yeah.
like very explicitly too. And so coming into this, we get into the low end theory. Now, Q-Tip has done interviews over the years, um, that this idea of the low end theory. It's really kind of a double resource, or a sourced and inspired idea. There's obviously the base, which there's the obviously the low end, and this
Right.
idea that hip hop really finds itself, there's that space between the beats. Originally it was the drum beats and basic samples, but there's all that space that kind of connotes a low end. Well, here we're filling in the low end and we're making the low end the star.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is just, black people in general, or they're coming in to society, whether it's trying to compete in education or music business or in life in general, from the low end of the socioeconomic totem pole.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so this is the idea that this is an album for black people, about black people, by black people, coming in, trying to get theirs, by redefining the game, which they did
and and and
wonderfully.
and also we got to realize 1991, hip hop was getting really popular, or was already really popular, but the dominant style of hip hop at this time was gangster rap, which
Yeah,
we will talk about that much later in this record, in this episode. But A Tribe Called Quest, they were the 180-degree opposite antithesis,
yeah,
of gangster rap, and they put it in your face. We are not N.W.A. We are not, those
yeah,
guys.
yeah. No, yeah, exactly. We are explorers along black culture, and the positive parts of black culture, the more intellectual parts,
Yeah.
which by the way is ironic, because one of Q-Tip's stated inspirations was straight out of Compton. And
Yeah.
because he saw that the base is not that strong. Like I said, you remember how I just said that
Yeah.
there was a lot of connotation that the bass could be there. Well, Dre's productions were so drum heavy and
Hmm.
so, like, basically just spaced out and slamming, that
Yeah.
the bass was connoted. And yeah, and there's a couple of great bass lines on that, like straight out of Compton, the song, on all of that, but the bass is not prevalent. And so the idea is that I'm inspired by that low end. I really want to make a low end record.
On the next episode, Chris and I will end a series that was truly a labor of love for us. Prince versus Michael Jackson, Chapter 5, is the final and saddest entry in this award winning, critically praised series. Both superstars' health starts to fail them due to increased and often secretive drug habits, and their attempts at commercial renaissances produce mixed results at best. Michael becomes a pop cultural icon who is increasingly irrelevant, while Prince seems oddly at peace with his elder statesman status and releases a couple of great underrated albums. The curtain comes down on the twin male towers of 1980s pop music brilliance. Email us at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com or hit us on Twitter at curmudgeonpod. All right, so our claim to the Low End Theory being the greatest hip hop album ever made will basically be formulated in the context of 8 points. We have 8 points, all right? And we're going to mention these points and we're going to fill them out. The first point, and we'll do this as quickly as possible. We don't want to spend too much time here. And that's eliminating the frequently evoked contenders for greatest hip hop album ever made. These albums are Raising Hell by Run DMC, 1987. Paid in Full, Eric B. and Rakim, 1987. N.W.A. Straight Outta Compton, 1988. Public Enemy, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, 1988. Dr. Dre's The Chronic, 1992. The Wu-Tang Clan, Enter the Wu-Tang, 1993. Nas, Illmatic, 1994. The Notorious B.I.G, Ready to Die, 1994. Lauryn Hill, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, 1998. Kanye West, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, 2010. And of course, more recently, relatively recently, Kendrick Lamar, To Pimp a Butterfly, 2015.
That's pretty much the list.
Yeah.
And so why are we choosing it over all of those? Well, I mean, we can make comments about a few of these. One, it's not disturbing, whether deliberately or otherwise.
Yeah.
Ready to Die, obvious to me is a relatively close second. The problem with that, though, it is a disturbing record. There's uh, a lot of horror, like kind of internal strife going on in that record. And not only that, but there's a misogyny and there's
Sure.
a real darkness and a realness to it that, while I admire it, is hard to listen to.
I scratch out The Chronic because I think that's the most overrated hip hop album ever made.
No, that's Lauryn Hill's record. Lauryn Hill. I mean, I like Lauryn Hill's record. I think it's awesome, and obviously, as a statement by a female rapper, it's kind of like the Joni Mitchell statement of hip hop. But
Yeah.
it's overrated. And I will say this: I think that Miseducation of Lauryn Hill and My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy might not exist if it wasn't for the Low End Theory.
I totally agree.
There's a lot. I mean, Kanye has even said that the first record he ever bought was the Low End Theory, and
Yeah.
so a lot of what he does is taking that ambition and that mission to fill the spaces and doing it in his own creative way. So, in other words, it's kind of a continuation of what Tribe did. Raising Hell proved that hip hop could be an album
Right.
art form, but the technology wasn't there at the time. It was that very spare Rick Rubin, Jam Master Jay, drum machines, and rudimentary samples.
And as rappers, those guys couldn't compare to Q-Tip or Fife.
Yeah, but they had a thing. They had a style that's incredible. I mean, in terms of just a pop thing, they were very clever. But it's not quite there. Enter the Woo is just a weird record. It's fantastic, but it's a really, really weird record. I think that To Pimp a Butterfly is kind of a hybrid of several things.
Sure.
And look, Kendrick is very gifted as a lyricist. I just don't think the production is quite there. I think To Pimp a Butterfly's MO is him and the words and the personality and his political outlook and just sort of championing the modern day struggles of Black Americans. You know,
I happen to think "To Pimp a Butterfly" is the best album of the decade. I've really grown to love this record, that record in particular. I think it is a masterpiece, but no, it is not better than A Tribe Called Quest, The Low End Theory.
yeah.
No,
And
no,
then
no, no.
yes, and then there are a lot of people that would think that "It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back" is the greatest. But
That's a tough challenger right there.
yeah, that is a tough challenger. But I would make a claim that that's more of a rock record, more of a punk record.
Yeah,
That there's a musicality to it, but it's so experimental and so whacked out that those guys just had their own thing. And when the artists and the music business caught up to the idea that they could make a whole bunch of money by getting in on the sample game,
yeah,
that pretty much ruined the Bomb Squad. you know,
yeah.
from there. And so, yes, there's a lot of creative sampling there, but it goes towards a collage that is more about the rock and the high end than
Yeah.
it is about the low end.
Right,
And
right.
then obviously the musicality. I mean, the main thing there is the interplay between Chuck D and Flavor Flav,
Yeah.
which never imitated, never duplicated. You can't get any more better with the hype man thing.
Sure.
But again, I just think it's more of a again, it's more of a clever record, and it's more of a sound collage record than this one. I think the end was the noise, not
Yeah.
the not the finished product. It was not a as deliberate of a paradigm shifter
Right.
as the
But
Long
don't but
Theory.
don't disqualify Chuck D's lyrics though, because
Yeah,
his political polemic on "It Takes a Nation" and the one after that, which I actually like more. I'm more of a fan of "Fear of a Black Planet" myself, just me personally.
yeah.
But Chuck D's polemic is what like defined a
Oh yeah.
generation of young African Americans growing up
Oh,
at that
oh
time.
yeah, no doubt. He's one of the great lyricists of all time. I mean, "Don't Believe the Hype" as probably the greatest lyric of all time, I think. But like I said, those I would say on that list, "Ready to Die" and "It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back" are probably the closest contenders for the
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
for the greatest title. But they just don't have they don't have the confidence. They don't have the musical depth. They don't have the what would you say, kind of the unification, like the unity, the everything that just ties. It's not as tied together
Yes.
on that.
I
And
mean, one thing about Low End Theory, at first listen, if you've never heard it before, you would think like, oh, everything kind of sounds the same, but it really doesn't. Every
no,
single beat and every single bass line, everything is distinctive. And this is what I think eliminates Illmatic from this, because I love Nas. And I think
yeah,
Illmatic's one of the greatest hip hop records ever made. But
very samey.
that album is very same sounding. The beats do kind of get to sound the same after a while. And what disqualifies the miseducation of Lauryn Hill for me is that toward the end of that record, her lyrics get a little, a little too whiny and a little too greeting card self help lyrically.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
you
pretty
know,
much. Yeah, it kind of peters out. It becomes more of an R&B record as it goes along
yeah,
too. And
right,
it peters out as hip hop. So
yeah,
yeah, no, there's a lot there, and so like to me, I think that the Line Theory is just it's compact, it's focused, it's varied, and it's just nonstop thrilling. And
yes,
the other thing that needs to be said is that a lot of these records they fall into skits, they fall into long conversation rambles, kind of defenses of themselves, a little too much goofiness, or a little too much, like all hip hop records, they had that sort of skits or they had those sort of
yeah.
jump offs. None of that on the Low End Theory.
Yeah, it's very to the bone. It's
Yeah,
like all the fat has been cut out.
yeah, no, not a single wasted note, not a single wasted word. And so I think that makes the difference.
Yes. Okay. So we've eliminated the other contenders, even though those are much beloved albums. Now, point number two, why we think it's the greatest album ever. It is the most important line of demarcation between what is known as old school and what is known as new school.
Yeah, absolutely. And they even talk about this on the record, that this idea of, in those lyrics that we cited from Excursion, where they kind of get into that, this idea that we're taking this to other regions, and we're wanting to take this further. And I think it had to do with the sampling. It had to do with the extension of the idioms, which we'll get into in the next point. But when you think of the old school and the new school, 1991 is where it really breaks. And so, you had them, you had Cypress Hill, stay tuned. You had Black Sheep. You had several other groups that kind of broke out 91, 92, 93, about there. Like the Far Side is one of these. But no one broke it harder, no one broke it better, and no one broke it more importantly than Tribe. In
and
terms, yeah.
and no one got referenced more as an influence from that period than Tribe.
Oh, no, no, yeah, absolutely. Look, old school. We think of the drum machines. We think of the rudimentary samples. The Rick Rubin guitar lines, or we think of the sort of more, again, sort of political or angry kind of. It was more
Yeah.
angry as opposed to the sort of layered argument kind of style that the rappers from Q-Tip on brought. And so it really became almost akin. And you got to remember, New Jack Swing is happening around this time too. So there's this idea of taking hip hop as this sort of spare art form that's culled together from a lot of different pieces, and putting it together and making and finding the music of it.
Yeah.
And boy, did Tribe find the music on this record, which is
Yeah.
why I think it's so revered.
Right,
Yeah.
and that kind of leads into the third point. The second point and third point are quite connected. Third point meaning that this album basically redefined the idiom of hip hop, not once, not twice, but three times. You have all the jazz sampling and the spirit of the last poets from the late '60s, early '70s. The bass line is the driver of the music, and the idea that beats can have texture that had never happened before in hip hop. The idea of beats having texture, that there's subtlety within the beats. And that's what makes the beats on this album, is what makes each song distinctive. It's not monotonous, it's not same sounding, because each song, each bass line, each drum fill, they all have their own little unique character to them. When you listen
Yeah.
to this out, when you listen to this album enough, that really comes through.
Yeah.
Midnight Marauders is the album that came after this one. It's a great album, and some would say it's better produced in the technical conventional sense. But no other hip hop album after Low End Theory sounds like the fucking Low End Theory, or didn't drop the bomb as hard as Low End Theory did.
Yeah, and let us expand on that. I think that with this record, yeah, I mean, obviously sampling was a thing. You try to outdo each other with samples or with the little bits that you would have, but digging in the crates became not just the thing to do, but it became an art form, and it became a competition. It was partially because of this record. Um, and when I say redefining the idiom, we're bringing in jazz, yes, and Gangstar was doing that at the same time, and
Sure.
arguably a little bit more sort of above board and kind of the stuff maybe folks knew. Uh, Q-Tip was finding stuff that was just really obscure and really. It comes A lot of it comes from the '70s, and a lot of it comes from these fusion records that were almost sort of. They were kind of funky, they were kind of jazzy, bass and horn and all this stuff going on, and drums especially on these. And he's taking all these bits and pieces from a lot of disparate sources, which we will actually catalog all of those samples here a little bit later in the episode. And so what you get from there is, yes, you do get a jazz feel. He does cop to comparing what he's doing in a hip hop sense to what the jazz guys were doing. That's all basically what Excursions is about. Verses from the Abstract gets into that quite a bit as well. But you also have the bass, like we said, explicitly. Now the bass is there. You get all of these upright double bass samples. Ron Carter actually comes in and plays live on Verses from
Yeah.
the Abstract, which it's famous for. And just to clear it up for folks, uh, he's only on to one song. He's not
Yeah.
all over the record. That's how smart that they were able to sample these things with. So it's all that those big fat ass bass lines, bugging out. Think about that one. Think about Rap Promoter, and then later on in the record, Sky Pager, which might be the most outdated song on it, but has one of the best beats on the whole damn thing.
Yeah.
Just awesome little double bass sample going on there. And then the third one, just like Arturo said, texture. That you have a lot of space in between those beats, but also you have those beats. And so one of the things that Q-Tip is famous for is in sampling these drum beats, he not only lays them down once, he lays them down twice, and in sometimes three different tracks. And so what you
Yeah.
do is you get this deepening of those beats. You get this, kind of stretching out or echoing or hitting even harder. And so he's layering the drum beats, which I don't know if anybody had done that up to that point. He's also, so obviously, like I said, there's the bass, but there's all these little vocal snippets, like from The Last Poet, say, or a few other things. He's taking like little guitar licks, that little guitar lick from Rap Promoter. He's taking all of these things and he's filling in, and that's the thing. This album is called Minimal, but boy, is there a lot of shit
Yeah, I know.
in all those airy spaces. And to the point where even a couple of them have like what might as well just be samples of wind going through the songs. Like Bugging Out is like that. I think there's a little bit of that going on in Check the Rhyme, where if you listen to it on headphones, you can hear like a wind going through it. And
Yeah.
so uh, I saw an interview with Bob Power, who is a veteran engineer who actually engineered this record, talking about what they were doing and the idea of uh, back then you had some limitations. You had only, I think, like 8 tracks, or you had a certain number of tracks to work with. And it's not like you could play it all together. So you had to put a piece here in this track and a piece here in this track and a piece over here. And so you really didn't know what it was going to sound like until you played it all back and started tweaking it. Uh, and so they're doing this all in their heads as they're going along too. So they're building in this texture and they're coming up with this idea of going as deep as they could and filling in those spaces as musically and as thrillingly as they could, but they don't know how it sounds. And then, of course, the punchline in this article from The Ringer that Bob Power talks in, he's like, I would be out of my mind if I did it now.
And speaking of texture and tracking, this leads to point number 4 of 8. And that is not just the rapping skills of Q-Tip and Fife, but it's the whole idea of the voice being its own instrument on a hip hop record. Not just the rapping, beyond the rapping and the rhyming and the flowing. It's the voice as its own instrument. And Q-Tip really started this more than any other hip hop artist. And you can kind of draw a line. Q-Tip started voice as instrument on a hip hop record. It starts with Q-Tip, begats Biggie Smalls, begats DMX, begats Lil Jon, begats fucking Kanye, and so on. And yeah, I mean, and like you mentioned in a discussion we had, Chris, earlier, we can talk about Rakim and Chuck D from Public Enemy, but those guys are more about musicality, not actual music, which is a difference.
Yeah, no, yeah, and that's an important point that Q-Tip, like you said, he's got that really kind of smooth, distinctive, almost like buttery. It's not even raspy. It's almost like this buttery smooth, like kind
Yeah.
of just like unique speaking voice, but also the way he talks. I did an interview with him 22 years ago, and he talks about his manager, and he actually says, Chris Lighty is my man for a very long time.
Hmm.
These kind of quirky things. And so you take those sort of idiosyncrasies with that voice, and he's able to position the beats so that his it's just perfect for his voice, you know.
Yeah.
And he does it for Fife too. Think about bugging out when he first comes in. Yo, microphone check. What is this? And the
Yeah.
way that that kind of high voice that
Yeah.
he has,
Yeah.
that it just works with the bottom, and then when it kind of takes off, and his voice fits right there, almost as its own instrument. And again, look, Biggie did it better than anybody. His people, Easy Moby and all of his uh, uh, producers did it brilliantly. Like to me, Biggie is the Miles Davis of hip hop, and to, like I mean, like his voice as an instrument is just incredible. I mean, just the way he could, kind of modulate it and have that deep voice, but the way he could kind of express it. Like if you hear "Gimme the Loot," I mean, that's like the greatest single vocal track in hip hop history. But we're talking about this record, Q-Tip and Fife, all the way through it. It just fits, and it is part of the music. It's and